Good evening to our viewers here at home and around the world. I am your host, Ajuri Ngilale, and you are most welcome to the State of the Nation. On this edition of the State of the Nation, our panel of analysts weigh in on an issue that has so heavily impacted the history of this country and that which will equally impact its future: leadership. Our panel of analysts will delve into this important issue and its ramifications for national development. But before we begin, we take a look at issues and events from around the globe in our Global Perspective segment. The floods that ravaged 19 states of the Federation from July to November 2012 passed some as an aberration of nature. Others attributed superstitious notions to the disaster, but it came to most as a shock, and with good reason. By November, a minimum of 370 Nigerians had been killed and over 2 million Nigerians displaced from their homes. While a massive food crisis in the country was largely averted, many farmlands and crops were washed away in the country's rural communities, just as already deteriorating roads, bridges, and other critical infrastructure were destroyed in cities across the country. But after such massive destruction of both lives and property, if there is an opportunity hidden in the crisis, it is the opportunity to take a serious look at what can be done to finally remedy the historically reactionary disposition of the nation's authorities, particularly at times of both man-made and natural crises. Beyond that, however, an additional opportunity lurks after a thorough evaluation of all factors contributing to last year's flood disaster in the country. First, there was infrastructural failure. In almost all of the urban areas affected by the floods, the failure of the drainage systems led to an enhancement of the disaster's impact, as converging floodwaters had nowhere to escape. The final destruction of dilapidated roads and bridges in both the rural and urban areas of the country made relief work difficult, while stifling any response efforts that were made in the immediate aftermath of the disaster. Secondly, there was institutional failure, a history of resource misappropriation, and the arbitrary appointment of inexperienced political allies of successive governments to strategically sensitive posts have given rise to a scenario in which essential institutions that require diligent planning, that should have been prepared for all magnitudes and permutations of crises, are found wanting when the nation is in dire need of them. The National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA, admitted as much at the conclusion of flooding in the country last year. The Director General of NEMA, Muhammad Sani Sidi, acknowledged that apparent gaps in the coordination of various disaster response agencies contributed to the lack of flood impact mitigation. He said so while noting that the federal government had to seek disaster response assistance from the United Nations, as existing capacity gaps had been exposed by the magnitude of the floods. NEMA did say that the Nigerian Meteorological Agency, NIMET, correctly predicted the impending disaster, and that the Ministry of Environment issued warnings, though by stating that NEMA failed to anticipate the quantum of the disaster, it renders curious the notion that adequate warnings were effectively relayed to the citizenry when the severity of the disaster could not be ascertained. The issue of flooding is not going away, and it is not limited to Nigeria alone. In the first week of 2013, Kenya has suffered a death toll of over 20 people and the displacement of 1,000 more as mudslides caused by flooding wreaked havoc in Kenya's North Rift region. In the second week of 2013, Zimbabwe has issued flood warnings after 4 people drowned in floodwaters, while more flooding is expected as rainfalls increase in the coming weeks. In all of this, a larger global specter requiring active human discipline and initiative looms above, and that is climate change. In December 2012, against the backdrop of major flooding in the homeland, Minister of Environment Hadiza Mailafia appealed to the 18th session of the Conference of Parties to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change in Doha to act decisively on measures to curb the effects of climate change. Though a noble effort, it is becoming more and more evident that action globally should begin with action at home. Despite the reality that emission control regulations have been passed into law on paper, they have been discarded in implementation. Despite the presence of the National Environmental Standards and Regulations Enforcement Agency, NESRIA, small and large vehicles emit unimaginable quantities of carbon dioxide as black smoke continues to fill the air and destroy our environment. As waters rise and the nation heats up and cools down at increasingly extreme degrees, Nigerians can and should hope that the federal government in action treats natural disasters as more than occurrences devoid of human responsibility and contribution, but rather as a threat to the collective to be tackled collectively. That marks the end of this Global Perspective segment. We're going to take a break. We'll be back in a minute. Stay with us. It is in historic times that we assess the state of the nation. For state and national development evaluation, politics unfiltered, and uncommon analysis of the issues and events of our time, join me, Ajuri Ngilale, on the premier news network of the African continent, right here on AIT. Welcome back to the program. The importance of leadership cannot be understated in both the private and public aspects of life. Examining this critical issue during our roundtable discussion is an esteemed panel of experts. To my right is Dr. Ejike Oji. You are welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you.
To his right is the publisher of Sardauna magazine, Mr. Hassan Rilwan. You are also welcome to the program, sir.
My pleasure.
Sitting opposite him is a leadership consultant, Mr. Linus Okori. You're welcome to the program, sir.
Thank you very much.
And last but not least, we welcome the country director of Oxfam, Dr. Chichi Okoye. You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
The issues of leadership come to the mind of almost every Nigerian every day when they encounter the different challenges that they face. Dr. Oji, in your mind, what is the greatest impediment to securing a good, strong leadership in this country?
In the context of Nigeria, are we on the same page what we want our leaders to do for us? Or are there basic philosophical differences, what we expect our leaders to do and what they are doing? Because if you say that I want to lead you to the river, but I want to go to a stream, as a flower, the leader is supposed to know what is good for the people and lead them that way. But what we see right now mostly is the fact that we're not sure that our leaders are empathetic to our needs, but you have to be a good leader to be able to find managers that will be able to help you do things. So if you ask me, I think one of the basic problems that we have in Nigeria is, are we on the same page with our leaders as to what we want and what we need? And a leader being a visionary, a true visionary, must also be very knowledgeable. For you to vision and say that I want to take my country or take my people to the same way, you must be full of knowledge, you must be full of empathy. You also must be able to attract people to follow you in terms of the way you do things. So it's an embodiment of what you do. Your body speaks volumes, and that's what occasionally people talk about, transformational leadership.
I think there's a total misconception of what leadership truly means. And, I'd like to share some definition so that our viewers can understand, the reason why we have not made a lot of progress as a nation. Leadership is actually defined by Dr. Myles Munroe, one of the best in the world, as the ability to motivate, drive, inspire a group of people to a particular direction by inspiration, not intimidation or manipulation. In that definition, you find 5 key elements. The first element in that definition is leaders initiate things, and it will take a leader to be able to set a vision to get something done. Number 2, it sets the direction. What quality of direction to say in the next 4 years, in the next 5, whether you're leading a team or an organization, as a nation, have you been able to say in the next 4 years, this is where we want to see this nation, and we transfer that vision to every Nigerian, people see it clearly and say, this is where we must be in 4 years, which means a transformational leader, say he comes into a system in 4 years, he sets an agenda, and after 4 years, people can see the obvious difference. There must be progress. There must be an upliftment of the people from one level to another. If there is none, then there's no leadership. There must be involvement of other people, the ability to carry the people along in the process. Are the people really, really comfortable with what is going on in this country? Are people trust the leadership in this country? Why don't they trust the leadership? That's the question. For instance, the greatest need of this country is for leaders to begin to groom good leaders and leaders for good.
Well, I think if we take it from there, I mean, if we go back to your question, which was what are the impediments to leadership, I think the way we throw up leaders is the biggest impediment to leadership in this country. I think that in many other countries that are progressive, leaders, I do believe that there's an element of nature in leadership. In other words, some people are born with the leadership quality. But it takes the society to then nurture that leader. So in many other countries, you have that people who are going to be leaders, have a certain type of tutelage. They go to certain schools. Within those schools, those schools have, training and capacity building for them, both formally and informally. So they begin to imbibe what Linus was talking about, those values, those skills for leadership. And then they get to a stage where they can now be thrown up for leadership positions in the country. Unfortunately, in Nigeria, we don't have that process. The only thing, majority of what gets you to leadership is who you know. We have a lot of godfatherism and, what is your political alliance, and then where do you come from, and if where you come from, if you're lucky that you come from where things have been zoned to, then it's the alliance within that. And so at the end of the day, the quality of people that are thrown up, when you go through all that process, none of it has anything to do with leadership. None of it has anything to do with quality. None of it has anything to do with capacity, ability, whatever. It's all about, primordial alliances and the rest of it. So that's where the problem starts from. Once the process of throwing up leadership is flawed, then obviously what you throw up is going to be flawed. So in Nigeria, we have people who have excelled. We have great medical doctors and great educationists and the rest of it. But then those people never make it to leadership positions. The people who have actually been groomed for leadership in Nigeria, who have gone through the ropes, hardly ever, if they do, it's an accident, it's not the rule. They hardly ever get to the positions of power. And that's the problem. So to fix this country, the first thing is to fix the process. How do we make sure that we throw up the right kinds of people for leadership? And I think that's the issue.
Yeah. So Doctor, how do we transition from godfatherism essentially to a meritocracy? And so my question to you, Hassan, is when you talk about leadership, you certainly, like Mr. Okori pointed out, you can't talk about leadership without talking about the followership. Do you think that in this country right now, we have the kind of followership that can rally behind that kind of that kind of a leader that can take the nation in the right direction?
When people say our leaders are not focused, I think you tell them that we're missing the point. Our leaders are actually very focused. It's about what is the agenda. You see, what we have in this country is not leadership for service. What we have in this country is everybody is going to office to do what? To share and to appropriate. That is the main thing. That is what directs everything that we're doing in this country. So, and you cannot achieve the kind of leadership we're talking about if you don't have people that are selfless. And this kind of selfishness that we have in our system is what makes our leaders, who we are all looking up to for leadership, it makes them to always change the goalposts at every point in time to suit what they want. That's what you see in all the politics that is taking place. Now, when you talk about the followership, you see, this leadership don't just get there. And in any case, they are product of the followership. Every leader that gets into position of authority actually emerged from the followership. I think the challenge we have is, I think the orientation of Nigerians generally need to be worked up on, you know, and we just need a leader that can lead us in that direction. Like Lionel said, that there's a serious value deficit. It's really been eroded in this country. People place values on things, on accumulation of wealth. You know, people are looked in that direction. People are scored in that direction. And when you get into office, it's a thing. It's just like a balance sheet of business. It's a thing of cost and benefit. So he wants to, get back all those things. So the expectations of our followership is also misconstrued. So the way forward, you see, it's important that the family system needs to be worked upon. You know, you see, we as a nation, we need to come to terms with the reality. We've really gotten it wrong in a whole lot of ways. And it has to start from that family value. We need to begin to train ourselves. We need to come to see things the way they need to be seen. And that is the only way. But if we just generally look at it, we continue to castigate our leadership. Leadership is about you knowing what to do. Okay, this is what I need to do. It falls in line with my value. I will not do this because of this. And you take decisions and you take responsibility for it.
I think there are two separate issues, though, quickly. One that has been harped on now from all of you has been the issue of character, the issue of integrity.
Yeah.
What about the issue of patriotism, though? Where does that come in, and how does that get cultivated?
You know, Singapore, as a nation, if you remember, during the independence, we are par with Singapore in terms of development. You know what Singapore did? Singapore took their very best of young people at that point in time. They saw the future, and they began to teach them the meaning of patriotism. They began to teach them the meaning of can-do-it spirit. They painted the picture of a future that they were willing to go to in 30 years and 50 years. And they began to teach those young people the critical leadership values that were needed. They taught those young people functional leadership. Functional leadership means that they taught those young people to develop their talents in terms of the specific potentials each person had. So the person who wanted to go and read medicine had passion to read medicine. The person who wanted to read education had passion to teach. Did you see that? And many years after, guess what happened? They taught those young people love for nation as primary in all their educational institutions. It was a must. And a few years after, see what Singapore, a country without any form of resources, in terms of natural resources, they only had human beings, and they invested thoroughly in their human capital. And see what Singapore has become. And look,
it wasn't as if Singapore didn't have the kind of peculiarities and challenges that we had as a nation. They have their ethnic issues, they had their issues of corruption, but it's just somebody just meticulously steered
A directed
the
them.
direction,
There was a
and then
direction.
reoriented the people and put them on the focus. So that's what we're talking about when you talk about leadership. Somebody needs to. And how did Lee Kuan Yew emerge? How did he emerge? That's what she was talking. How do people emerge in this country? You see, at the end of the day, it's because he emerged from the same people, the followership, and people gave him that opportunity as a leader. And then this is what has become. So when you put sycophants into office, when you put people mediocres into office, when you put people that don't have a vision into office, you cannot be treating malaria with Panadol.
What do we really want our leaders to be like, and what should they be doing? The case of Singapore, it was a time in the history of Singapore. Like you said, we are part independence. When you talk about leadership, somebody just has to say, let's start from now and move forward.
absolutely.
You understand?
Absolutely.
And that's where it comes to the once, because I always say, if you look at St. Aquinas' law, who is the first mover? The first mover for me is that leader who will say, my central point and vision is to move my people forward. And it could be anybody. In changing a whole country, it's not usually a crowd, just 1, 2, 3 individuals. In Malaysia, the person that did the change was Mohammed, isn't it? It was 20 years of benevolent tyranny, so to speak, if we use that word. And then brought a lot of people to follow him, and he went in one direction. Now, Malaysia is a first world. A leader comes and says, this is my last time in office, like our President Jonathan is right now the president. If he makes a decision, come 2015, this is how leadership is going to evolve, and let it be true internal democracy within the
Absolutely.
parties. And then let it be also proper democratic dispensation out there. Then people will be put on notice and things will start moving forward.
We know government is a big operation, and even if there's a well-intentioned leader, how do you get to a point where across the entire governance apparatus you have people of the same vision? I think that's kind of the area where we tend to stumble in this country. Dr. Okoye?
You know, I think that for me, what we need to do is, you know, I do agree that the leader is very important because the leader gives direction and the rest of it. But I think that in the context of Nigeria, with the way things are organized, I think it will take a revolution to have that kind of leadership come up. And since we don't want a revolution, what do? I think that the only way we can get the kind of leadership that we're looking for now is to really go to the communities and educate the people on what leadership is about.
Absolutely.
I think that if we're able to do that, because we've all said here, people, you know, the leaders are thrown out from the communities. It's a vicious cycle because the poor person in the village wants that bag of rice because it's probably the only thing they're going to get, you know, for the 4 years or the 8 years of the person going to. So how do you tell somebody, please don't take this right, vote right? You know, because they have never seen good leadership. So how are they going to be able to tell that if they don't take their bag of rice and they vote for the person who is the so-called good person, that development will come to them anyways? But I think that with a systematic, you know, training, you know, and campaign at the local level, at the individuals, trying to make people understand that there is a relationship between their voting and development, and helping them use democracy as a tool,
to change,
you know, as a tool, because that's really what because I mean, we when we say that we have 70% literacy rate in this country, you know, we take it for granted, but that makes a lot of difference in terms of being able to get people to think in a certain way, to act in a certain way. You know, I've always argued that democracy really functions better where you have a very high rate of literacy. It's very difficult to have people, you know, who can't even read or write, understand the mechanisms. But it's possible to do. I mean, start at the community level and the rest, and begin to empower people to understand how to use their votes effectively and how to say no to leaders. Because in Nigeria, everything that government does, we see government as doing us a favor. So a government does a borehole and the community is out rejoicing, dancing and singing and thanking and praying for the person when it is his job. We need to tell, once people begin to understand that this is the job of the, you know, whoever is in power, it is your money that is being sent. They're not doing you a favor. Once you begin to enlighten people, it might take a little time. And democracy, there's no shortcut, as far as I'm concerned, to development. As long as once we start that process, I think that in a very short time, you know, we will begin to throw up little by little good leadership in different places.
In fact, you know, I think you've summarized the point. Leadership development and advocacy is an issue that can penetrate into our local communities, into the school systems like never before. But it has to be a massive movement. And you will need businessmen and women, you will need government institutions that will have to pump in money to say, you know what, whoever that is responsible for, you know, selling messages that can transform the thinking, the mindset of our people, you know, we need to support them in a very huge way. If you're able to do that and it becomes a movement all over this country, I can tell you in 2015, that is even close, Nigeria will go in the local government levels, in the state levels, in the national level to elect leaders with honor and integrity, because the people that are willing to lead, who are all over this country, will say, let us move in there and make things better for this country. This country must change. We have no choice about it.
And that's a powerful point to end this edition of the State of the Nation. I want to just very gratefully thank all of our experts that have come today to share their expertise and knowledge with us on this very important issue of leadership. My name is Ajuri Ngilale. Until next time and always, may God